and
Okay.
admit more people as they come in.
All right, great. Thank you. Welcome, everybody. My name is Susan Haight. For those of you that don't know me, I see some old faces, and new names. So welcome. It's good to see you. I was one of the founding directors and also the first president of the Foggy Bottom West End Village. And it's my privilege today to introduce our speaker for Art Thursday. I want to remind you to keep your computer muted while Beth speaks and while we all speak. Put your questions into the chat, and Denise will monitor those later. And also, this session is being recorded, so make sure that everybody knows that. So without further ado, I want to introduce Beth, our speaker, who has a resume that goes on for pages and pages and pages. She's given us her time, and she runs, or she's on 6 nonprofit boards, and she runs several different companies. She is her claim to fame for us anyway is that she is a theatrical producer and has produced plays in many venues, of which some are Broadway and some are our own arena stage. She's a Tony Award-winning executive producer, for Evan Hansen, and Arena Stage has named her, and she sponsors an award for outstanding women for contributions to the Washington region. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to you, Beth. Thank you.
Thanks, Susan. And it's a pleasure to see all of you today. It's interesting to note that there are only women on this call, which speaks to the producer role that I'm going to talk about today. I don't know whether you have seen the movie or the play, The Producers, but there's a wonderful song in there called So You Want to Be a Producer. And if that's why you've joined us today and you're interested in what it's like to be a producer, what it takes to be a producer, and whether or not you should get into the business, we're going to talk about all of that and some of the experiences that I've had doing this. I came to this business as a producer late in life. I'm about to turn 85. I started this business in, I guess, my late 70s, but I've already started 13 businesses in my lifetime, which is why the resume goes on forever. I'm a classic job jumper, and started a lot of businesses, worked for a lot of corporations, and have always loved theater and acted in my first play when I was in middle school. I had absolutely no talent, but I figured out if I wrote my own stuff for the talent shows that we produced in middle and high school, I could get a part. And so I wrote for myself, terrible stuff. But I've loved theater ever since I was a young child. Being a producer is not being Max Bialystock or Leo Bloom. They were fraudulent schemers who set out to bilk thousands of dollars from unsuspecting old ladies who wanted the glamour of being part of the theater by investing in it. And while the movie before it and the subsequent play of the same name are totally fictional, they really are fictional, there are kernels of truth that make both the movie and the play succeed. And if a play doesn't have a kernel of truth, it never succeeds. In The Producers, the truth is that producers are, in fact, the money source that makes the dreams of creators come true. That's really our main job. Rich old ladies and men are the only ones who are actually legally allowed to invest in productions. So Max and Leo targeted that group of rich old ladies. For those of you who have invested in alternative stocks or other investments, you know that you have to be a qualified investor if it's not registered with the SEC, and no plays are ever registered with the SEC. So you have to be a qualified investor in legal terms. And turns out there are a lot of rich old ladies who are. And finally, the glamour of being part of the theater crowd is more important to that group and to the men who also make investments, and they are increasing in plays. Now, there's a difference between being a producer and being an investor, and I think we need to set the ground rules. I'm going to talk about being a producer. An investor is someone, okay, so a producer is actively involved in every facet of the play from start to finish. An investor, on the other hand, has no influence or participation beyond writing a check to the producer to participate in the financial outcome. So think of it as the producer is the CEO of the company who runs the show, and the investor is the stockholder. But in the case of an investor in a play, you don't even get a vote on who runs the company. You just put your money in and you hope. Today, we're going to talk about the producer, but in case you decide to invest, and I'm certainly not encouraging that today, we're going to talk a little bit about what it's like to be an investor first. You might want to know that every Broadway producer will tell you the same thing about being an investor. Ken Davenport, who was the first producer who roped me into being an investor, was the same guy who brought Kinky Boots to his investors as an investment that grossed $174.8 million the first year and is still paying dividends. I passed on that. John Briglio, who's one of the top entertainment lawyers on Broadway, and a really close friend of Michael Bennett. In fact, he's the executor of his estate, and he was the lead producer on the highly successful revival of Michael Bennett's Chorus Line, agrees. And what they agree on is what I also agree on, which is that Broadway is probably the most treacherous artistic endeavor in the world. So if you want to be an investor, that's the caveat. The reason for that is that as a producer, you don't know the scope of the market, which in any other business defines its size and its competition. We don't know how many plays there are under development today, meaning that they have a producer, they're being workshopped, they may perform in a regional theater, they may be fully invested, but they never even make it to a pre-Broadway tryout. So investments in that theater market are an unknown quantity. Part two, 75% of those plays that are in development that are fully invested, most plays in development are not fully invested. They have seed capital, but not full investments. So 75% of the plays that actually are fully invested have developed and tried out of town, never make it to Broadway. So the money invested in those is lost. Every dollar, producer and investor, is lost. Of the 25% that actually make it to the Great White Way, 6 in 10 may recoup, but they recoup means that the original investment is recouped by the producer and the creative team, but it never returns a penny to the investor. That's the way it's structured. And the rest may return less than 10% on your investment. It is the rare Broadway production that returns a profit for all of its investors and allows them to participate in the touring companies nationally and continues to profit from merchandise, recording sales, subsequent licensing of the production in perpetuity. And that's really where you make your money as an investor. Okay. So until Hamilton, only 3 Broadway plays had earned over $1 billion in the last 20 years. And all of them played for at least 16 years before they got to $1 billion. Anybody got any ideas on what those 3 top winners were? Susan, you have to unmute. Susan, you're muted. Yeah,
No,
go
yeah.
ahead.
My Fair Lady?
Nope. No. The top three were Lion King, which did $1.5 billion in 16 years. Wicked, that did 1.25 billion in 17 years. And Phantom of the Opera, which has been playing 28 years, longest running on Broadway, has done 1.18 billion. There is a breakthrough. Hamilton is on track to earn $1 billion in 10 years. It's going to take 10 years for Broadway to give back its profits. And that's because the investors in Hamilton were not included in the merchandising sales, the records, or the Disney movie deal that launched Disney's streaming platform. So you can be an investor even in $1 billion production, and you still don't get full benefit of being there. So if you want to be an investor, get yourself a good lawyer to look at the contract you're signing, because in today's world, we really have changed the way the investment pool works. So you do begin to get your investment money back as the producers begin to recoup, and that's important. What do I mean by merchandising? You'll see that I'm wearing a scarf today. This is a Dear Evan Hansen piece of merchandise, and you can see that it's got Dear Evan Hansen on the scarf. Big deal that merchandising today is almost important as ticket sales on Broadway. And Dear Evan Hansen was very good to me. We started it at Arena. I became part of the production team at that point. So it had already been in development for 7 years. I didn't find it. Stacy Mindich did. And that's the one for which I got my Tony. So kind of fun to have a Tony. And it also helps as a producer because you can say, you've won a Tony. Nice. Doesn't make you a nickel, but it's good to have. And very, very proud that Tina, Adrienne Warren, won Tina for her part in the Tina Turner the Musical, and I'm also producing that one. And the reason I got involved in that was because it's book writer, and those are the guys who control all the rights to subsequent productions. So you really want to know the book writer. The book writer, Katori Hall, started her career as a resident playwright at Arena Stage, and I got to know her when she was writing on the Mountaintop, for which she won awards subsequently on Broadway and on the West End in London. And Katori called me when she was taking Tina to the West End and asked if I would come and see it in London. I did, loved it, thought there were some changes to make a commercial on Broadway. Together we made those changes. We brought it to Broadway, and thank God it's been very successful. So I've had some successes, but it's rare. I got into this business because my husband and I had made investments in several plays as investors, and they all lost money. We invested in Moise Kaufman's 33 Variations that went on to Broadway with Jane Fonda in the lead. She was nominated for a Tony. The author was nominated for a Tony. The play got rave reviews. It barely recouped. We lost all our money. And then we invested in Bridges of Madison County. The book was the bestseller. The movie was the moneymaker. The Broadway musical version had a great cast, had all the earmarks of being fabulous. It sold out in its pre-Broadway run. Jason Robert Brown actually won a Tony for his music for the play. It never recouped. We lost all our money, and that was a Ken Davenport show. We invested in an Anna Devere Smith play called The American President. She's an acclaimed actress and playwright. She had already won awards for her plays Human Stain and Rachel Getting Married. The play was a disaster in development. We were embarrassed by being affiliated with it. We lost our money. So why would I ever want to be a producer with all of these caveats that I've shared with you? It seems pretty stupid for somebody who thought she was a fairly savvy businesswoman to get into this business. I knew the statistics. As I said, I'd already started 13 unrelated businesses in my lifetime. All of them except one was successful. So I knew what it took to make a successful business. And I also knew that no one knows how to predict success on Broadway. But I fell in love with the play. The play was The Originalist. And I don't know whether any of you saw it at Arena. I hope you did. Great, great play. It's the story of Antonin Scalia and a fictional conglomerate of law clerks that he had hired. He always hired a liberal law clerk. And so John Strand, the playwright, who has done some wonderful work at Arena that you may also have seen, Snow Child among them. Arena had commissioned John to do this play about Scalia and his lesbian African-American law clerk. And Scalia tasked her with the job of writing his defense of marriage dissent. You can imagine what that would be like for a liberal gay law clerk. In any case, through the play, the conservative and the liberal have serious conversations in which they find out how the other one ticks. And they come to respect each other by the end of the play in a way that I think is a vital story in today's world of divisiveness, even more important today than it was in 2015 when we originally produced it. And I desperately wanted it to go on to Broadway, and I kept harassing Molly Smith, who was its director, and the artistic director at Arena. By then I was on the board at Arena. I joined the board in 1988, so I'd been there for years making noise, none of which was listened to, fortunately. But this one I really wanted to see go to Broadway, and I kept harassing Molly, why don't you get it to Broadway? And she said, well, you need to talk to Edgar. Edgar, it's the Edgar Doby, who's the executive producer at Arena. And before he came to us, he had been Andrew Lloyd Webber's producer on Broadway and brought Phantom of the Opera to Broadway, and subsequently ran the Tony Awards for the Broadway lead for 4 years before he went into nonprofit theater as a producer. So he really knew its way around Broadway. And Molly said, talk to Edgar. We've been trying to get one of the Broadway dramaturgs who make the decisions to give us a theater on Broadway and put a producer together who would get it there. So far, we haven't been able to get anybody to read the play. Well, that was pretty hard for me to hear. Why would Broadway, where we produce the thoughtful stuff that people can talk about in this country without animosity, learn who each other would be, learn how we interact in civilized ways that make a difference in our society, which is what I think is important about theater and where I come from. How could Broadway not want to read it? Well, they didn't want to read it because it was about Scalia. And they said they have 300,000 subscribers on Broadway to Broadway theater. And those are the subscribers who really make a difference in a play's success or not. And they're all liberal, and they wouldn't come to see something about Scalia. And I thought, well, that sucks. And I don't agree with that. So Molly said, why don't you produce it? And I said, because I don't know how to be a producer. And I started enough businesses to know that, have to know something about the business. And she said, will you produce it? And we'll teach you how to be a producer. What that meant was she was going to send me to Edgar because she wasn't going to take any part in that. And she didn't. Edgar and I collaborated. I became the producer. We got an off-Broadway theater, 53 at 53, in the following summer to the play's original run. And ultimately, we did get a Broadway theater. Unfortunately, we got it on 6 weeks' notice, and there was no way to put the $3.5 million together that it would take to put it on Broadway. And so it never did get to Broadway, but it did get rave reviews and it did get its theater. And I was cooked because at that point, I had the appetite. I had a little bit of knowledge, which is a dangerous thing in anybody's world. And I started the business. Edgar said to me, if you're going to start the business, you have to have a name. And I said, well, you know what, I want to name it, but I can't. Because what I want to tell those 3 dramaturgs in New York who control 39 of the theaters in that city, out of the 41 that are considered Tony qualified theaters on Broadway, that's the Broadway world. And there are only 3 companies that control 39 of the 41 theaters, and 3 dramaturgs for each theater company, theater owner, who are the gatekeepers to whether or not you actually get on Broadway. You know what I want to tell them? This. But my mother would die if I did that, if she were still alive. How could I do that? And 2 weeks later, I got a copyright on the name of my production company. And here it is. Middle Finger Productions. By the way, this card gets me into a lot of tours because everybody says, what? How did that happen? And I get to tell them. The bottom line on all of this is that if you're going to be in Broadway, what I learned is that passion for the product is important, but passion is an emotional decision, and that's not enough. A successful producer in this business must be knowledgeable about every facet of the enterprise. Knowledge is power, and power controls the fate of the show. So you need to know certain basics. First of all, you probably need to know the 3 companies that own those 39 theaters on Broadway. A Tony qualifying theater, by the way, means that they are located within the theater district from Lincoln Center to 42nd Street, and each theater that qualifies has to have at least 500 seats, which, by the way, are not the theaters that make you successful, unless you're producing only a very small cast play. It also helps to know the off-Broadway theaters where Broadway-bound shows, even those that have done their pre-Broadway tryouts in other cities across the country, primarily in nonprofit institutions that are becoming a big producer on them on their own, have already tried out, because out-of-town audiences react very differently than New York audiences. So it does help to take your show to an off-Broadway theater, tweak it, and make it successful with their Broadway audience before you actually hit the boards. Because when you hit the boards, you will be dealing with 14 unions who really control your fate. Hamilton, for example, that produces 8 shows a week on Broadway, has 25,831 employees among its direct employees and its indirect employees in the unions that service the show. And those are everything from equity, which are the guys who are telling us that we have to have a mask and a vaccination card to get into a theater, even though the mayor of New York has lifted those restrictions in Broadway. Equity says we have to continue because there is not a single show on Broadway today that has not lost at least 1 performance a week during the COVID problem. Susan asked me earlier what I thought the future of Broadway is. That's a whole conversation of its own. Broadway is in serious trouble. As a producer, I have 2 very highly rated shows going right now, Dear Evan, Hansen, and Tina, as I said. Both of them were producing regular profits for me before the shutdown. Neither of them have returned $1 since we've been back. And the reason is that we've had to cancel at least 1 and usually 2 and as many as 3 shows a week due to a COVID alert, which does not mean that anybody had COVID, but somebody tested positive in that large group of people you never see off stage or people on stage. Company, for example, with Patti LuPone, lost Patty LuPone for 3 weeks because she actually got COVID. So they lost their star, all kinds of refunds. And if you have to refund the ticket, costs money to refund it, costs money to sell it in the first place, costs money to resell it the second time. You can't make any money unless you are at your projected capacity for 8 performances a week. You can't get 8 performances. It's dire straits on Broadway. Anyway, you also need to have some kind of an acquaintance with those 14 unions that I talked about, because if you're not on good terms with those union organizers, you're not going to be on Broadway, even if you get a theater, which is the first gate that you have to cross. So what are the duties of a producer? We talked about an investor and what you don't get to do as an investor. A producer who goes from start to finish with a show, chooses the play, hires the professionals, and that's everybody from the leads and the cast, not the entire cast, that's up to the director, but has to say in who the leads will be, and has to say in who the director, the creative director will be, the choreographer, and the set and lighting designers all fall under the producer's purview to be part of hiring. The director and the playwright control the final decisions, but the producer is part of that and actually is the one who recruits them in the first place. The producer raises all the money for the production, and that usually means that a producer has a pool of investors that they go to spread the risk. And those are the guys who are at most risk for their money. Occasionally, a producer will produce something on his own, very rare. And also rare are women producers on Broadway. Stacey Mindich is one of the leading producers on Broadway. She's the one who brought Dear Evan Hansen from the beginning to the end, and her story is fascinating, but too long to tell you on this call. For I think you have some questions you may want to ask me. As I said, I went on from Dear Evan Hansen to produce the Tina Turner musical. I'm about to open Billy Crystal in Mr. Saturday Night on open April 27th. It's sold out for the first 5 months. That's good news. We hope with COVID, we'll actually be able to produce it successfully. It's a show that he actually wrote for the movie, Mr. Saturday Night. Jackie Mason played the lead because Billy himself was too young, but he brought with him to this production his own director from Hollywood, who's great. And I think it's going to be a wonderful show. I encourage you to see it. Let me know if you need tickets. We'll arrange producer tickets for you. It'll still cost. And I'm also bringing the Britney Spears musical, Once Upon a One More Time, which you may have seen in its pre-Broadway trial at Shakespeare over the Christmas holiday this year. That turned out to be the highest grossing show in Shakespeare's history. They extended it for 9 performances beyond its expected run. It's a wonderful show about how all of the princesses in the fairy tales we love, from the early years of Grimm and Andersen to the current princesses of Disneyland and Disney World, share the same story. It is the woman who does the heavy lift in the story, and they all marry the same Prince Charming. And Britney, as somebody who has certainly been performing for years under very constraints herself, realized how important it was for women to have their own roles in the story. And so she brought this production together. I've been part of the production team, leading with the Nederlanders for 5 years to get it to Broadway, closed for 2 years, as you know, with the pandemic. Both Billy Crystal and Britney made significant changes without workshopping. Remember, I said producers are part of the workshops all the way through. We were without the workshops, couldn't get together, not even on Zoom. And both of them as the writer, and the writer controls the final destiny of that play because no line gets changed without the writer. And the writer is the one who holds the rights. Both Billy and Brittany, as the writers of those shows, went to work during COVID, and both plays got significantly darker. So we've had a lot of pulling back to their original concepts during this period of coming to open. And if you saw the play at Shakespeare, you saw most of what you will see on Broadway, but there will be some significant changes from my perspective, and I think make it a better story even than it started. But that's what happens with pre-Broadway. You change until the night the show is reviewed, and then it is locked in, and it's locked in forever on opening night. So when you see an opening night performance, you are seeing what anybody in an audience will see forever after, with the exception of after your death. And if you, the playwright, die and you leave the rights to your estate, which all playwrights do, subsequent trustees of that estate can modify the show to meet current demand. And we at Arena Stage, where I did become chairman of the board at one point a few years ago, have taken two plays in recent history. One, the wonderful Cole Porter, Anything Goes, which you may have seen with our great cast here a few years ago. And Molly, who is very sensitive to our world as it is today, she changed and insisted that the estate agree to allow her to change the part of the two Chinese characters in the play from the caricatures that they were originally written, very anti-Asian performance, to much more of today's Asian American in the play. And now it's the standard for Anything Goes. That is the play that we produce forever after, based on Cole Porter's original. And the current play that we are about to launch next week, Catch Me If You Can, has had also significant uprights of the same nature. So Molly is very sensitive, and I'm very, very proud of the work she does and very proud to be part of her world. And so I've become part of Billy Crystal and Britney Spears. I have 3 other shows under development, one that will go off Broadway at the Goodman Theater this spring called Life After. It was originally scheduled to do its off-Broadway trial here in Washington at Arena, but we couldn't fit it into our schedule, so we've taken it to the Goodman. That's the story written by a woman, produced by a woman, 2 women actually, with me and my partner. 8 women in the cast of 9, 1 man, and it's the story of a teenage girl who has a fight with her father. She's about to go out to school. He calls her, leaves a message on her phone telling her that they have to make up before he gets on this business trip on the plane that he's going on. And he's killed before they have that meeting. And it's the aftermath of unraveling his story, why he didn't get on the plane, why he was killed, where he was, and what his relationship was in the family, that knits the family left behind, mother and 2 sisters, to a new level of closeness. And I think it's a very powerful story. Undertook it again because I'm passionate about that kind of story, having lost my first husband, leaving me with 7 children between the ages of 10 and 16. So I know what it is to lose that father and to have to reknit the family, and that's what this story is. I also have a story called Becoming Nancy. It has had its pre-Broadway trial in New Jersey at the Paper Mill Playhouse. Hopefully we'll be able to get it to Broadway. Becoming Nancy, it's the story of a young man in London in 1979 when the gay riots were going on. He is cast in his he tries out for the lead in his high school play, which is Oliver. And instead of getting the male lead, he's cast as Nancy because his director recognizes that the young man is gay. And all the problems that Billy Elliot has with his father in that wonderful musical that ran on Broadway and didn't return anything to its investors, by the way. But some of the same conflicts and some of that same story. So the plays that I produce have a message that it's consistent with my own belief structures. Some of them win, most of them don't. But it's a lot of fun to be in this business. And it's certainly fun to go to those opening nights and see what goes on. So I guess I am one of those old ladies who produces Broadway, or who invests in Broadway for all the wrong reasons. I'm delighted to take your questions. Anything you'd like to know?
Beth, I'm like exhausted listening to you and all that you take on. It's like I'm glad I can get coffee in myself in the morning. I did have, I think you answered this, but when people, I call it pitch, they pitch you an idea, or they, after it's baked or crystallized, or when's the best time for you to get involved?
Well, that's a great question, Susan. The best time to get involved when it's had its pre-Broadway trial, and the lead producer is willing to allow you to take what we call an above-the-line producer position in the play, which means that you've put in enough money to get your name above. You have some input in the final product, not a whole lot. They don't have to listen to you, but they do because you're now a major investor. And but that's the point at which you really see what it's going to look like when it gets to Broadway. You have enough input to bring it to where you think it needs to be, but you don't get the choices that you get if you're there at the very beginning. If that's the difference between a lead producer and a secondary lead producer. Lead producer, where I was with Tina, where I was with sort of there with Dear Evan Hansen, because it did it pre-Broadway at Arena, and that's where I got involved with it. And because I was able to be involved with it at that time as a producer, I did have influence on the outcome on Broadway, both at Arena and at second stage before we went on to Broadway. We decided, by the way, to go to second stage pre-Broadway, even though we'd been very successful in Washington with the play and thought it was pretty well finished. Michael Grief, the director, and Pasek and Paul, the songwriters, Steve Levinson, the book writer, all thought we could still do a little more tweaking. And we decided to hold off going to Broadway for a much more important reason that had nothing to do with any of the above changes that wanted to be made. Hamilton opened in the same season, and we didn't want to be up against Hamilton for the Tony, so we put it off a year, went to the second stage, did make some important changes, brought it to Broadway, and of course won the award for Best Musical, and Ben Platt took it for Best Actor. So that was a business decision. That was not a creative decision, really. So the answer to your question, Susan, is if you find the play and you're passionate about it and you're there at the beginning, you're going to have the biggest profit at the end, because you will control the rights and the merchandising. As I showed you that scarf for Evan, we've got all kinds of stuff that people love to have. That famous blue striped polo shirt has become a winner. And you get to play in all of those. So I'm invested in that one, as because of my producer's role, I was allowed to invest in Broadway, obviously, but also in all the touring companies that are running in the overseas West End production, in the production in Australia. We're taking it to Japan, believe it or not, and I'll play in that one, and they've all been successful. So I've done very well in Evan.
Yeah.
Actually, Evan is really, at this point, underwriting everything else I'm doing. but I
Yeah.
haven't seen any money from it since the COVID
Mm.
started.
Yeah,
Lost
Yeah.
money on it since COVID started. That's the downside.
yeah.
Denise, do we have some questions in the chat?
No,
You
we
there?
don't, but I'd encourage anybody who has a question to just go ahead and unmute yourself and ask. We're a pretty small group, so that shouldn't be a problem.
Yeah, Jackie.
Sorry about that. The question is, when the show closed because of the pandemic, did you still have the costs of rental costs for the theater, and you know, how much were you still putting out even though the show wasn't running?
And we were still putting out for ticket refunds. We were putting out for crew and cast to dismantle the set. We were putting out, and that's not an insignificant cost. We were putting out a very reduced rate for the theater rental to hold it until we came back. And we were putting out small stipends for salary. What we did get during COVID, which was a lifesaver, were the two grants from the federal government. The first was the PPP loans, which we qualified for, and the second were the loans, the funding that was specifically for shuttered venues. So we were able to participate in the shuttered venue grants that came to the theaters we were in because we were still paying rent. So we got a small percentage of that. The theater owner obviously took the big share of that piece, but we did get PPP grants. So that helped us fund some of that stuff, but our actors were out of business for the entire time. We were not allowed to charge for any of the streaming that we did online during that period of time. Equity prevented that. Equity made it impossible for their actors to be paid during that period of time. And I think we're going to see some major changes in the structure of Equity as the controlling union for the actors, because it turns out that the woman who's the executive producer of Equity, who's the executive CEO, I guess, of Equity, had been there 25 years. Equity self-funds their health insurance. And she saw this as an opportunity because it is in the Equity rules that if you don't work for 90 days, you can no longer be covered by the Equity health insurance. And of course, nobody was working. So she saw this as a way of really stockpiling all of the money that would have been spent on health insurance and underwriting it for the union so that it would keep their coffers going and pay their people. And of course, now that that's come to light, there are a lot of internal discussions, I think is a nice way to put it, at Equity about whether or not the power that they control is going to continue as it is. But it was a disaster. It was a theatrical disaster. And many of the people who really are critical to the production of any play on the creative side, the costume designers, the wig makers, the lighting designers, the choreographers, all of the people that you don't see, but you can't produce a play without, went to other professions to use their creative talents in other ways. So we've lost hundreds and thousands of people in the industry, and we're trying to bring them back, but it's hard because we're not making any money.
Yeah.
There's a comment in the chat, Beth. It says, no question, just a huge bravo. So interesting. I had no idea about the behind the scenes of this side of theater. Thank you for being a producer and for sharing your knowledge and experience.
Well, thank you, whoever wrote that. It's fun to, thank you, Denise. It's fun to
I do
share.
have a question. Yeah.
Yeah.
My question is, and I don't think you mentioned it, but once the play is produced, then how are you still then involved with the play throughout its, and are we talking hours a week, or at what level do you switch from beyond belief hours to, you know, quarterly or something like that?
It depends on whether you're the executive producer or the secondary producer. If you're the executive producer and the play continues to run, you are involved 100% of your time in it. You still can produce other plays. And the men on Broadway who have been successful do produce multiple plays at the same time. And they have enormous staffs to take care of the accounting, the legal, all of the payrolls, which are, as you can tell, enormous, and all of the details of replacing costumes, refitting. Actors change size. You have to refit costumes. You have to remake wigs on a regular basis because they wear out. The Tina Turner wig, for example, weighs 20 pounds. So Adrian and her new Tina, Maui, only can perform 5 times a week because they can't, I mean, they're little girls and they can't wear that on their head forever without putting their back out. So as a producer, you're involved in all of that. And then you're involved in setting up national tours, working with theaters directly in remote locations and with touring companies that are set up, that you set up to take the show, because it has to be under the control of the producer as to what goes on the stage, because we have to protect the playwrights. So you're 100% involved. This is why running 2 other businesses and sitting on those boards is really challenging at this point.
Right.
You know, success has its own rewards.
Have any of your children gone into theater?
They all love theater. No. I have 4 biological children. I adopted my brother's 3 children. He died at an early age of a brain tumor. And I have 3 bonus children, stepdaughters from my second husband. So I have 10 children. And none of the biological children became a physician. Their father was a pediatrician and died at 42. None of them went to medicine. None of the others, the 3 who were my bonus daughters, their mother is a Broadway actor and a Broadway author, and still working today at 88. And none of them went into the theater. So I think kids don't go the way their parents do in a lot of cases. If my kids are any produce.
I'd like to say personally that I've always wanted to be adopted by you. And have been waiting for the opportunity. With the other 10 ahead of me, I think it's not going to work.
Yeah, well, I know you have your eyes on one of my daughters. So.
I do. I'm willing to take her in a draft trade.
There you go.
All right. Any other questions, thoughts? If not, Beth, thank you so much. This is so enlightening, and we so appreciate you giving us your time when given your schedule and everything. We're thrilled, just thrilled. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Well, thank you, Susan, and I will welcome all of you to the theater at any time. Let me know. You know that you know where to find me.
All
So,
right. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Denise, and thank you, Jackie.
Thank you.
thank you for setting it up. Bye.
Thank you.